โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening. One of the qualities of the Dhamma that we chant is that the Dhamma is opanayiko. You say leading inwards, meaning we to understand the Dhamma, to see the truth, which is what the Dhamma is referring to, we need to bring our attention back into this body and mind in the present moment. The Buddha encouraged us to develop direct knowledge and experience of the way things are. And quite often that's countering our habit, which is to let our mind wander outside, to get to know the world on the outside, the world through the senses, eyes, ears, tongue, nose, skin, touch, and then the mind itself. We think about other people, other places, other events, past, future. Sometimes it seems like the last thing we know is our own body and mind in the present moment. But this is where the Buddha was pointing to, the opanayika Dhamma, and learning to bring our attention inwards. We say incline the mind to the Dhamma. Incline implies bending the mind. And you feel like that when you're meditating, your mind is sort of trying to go out, to think about all these other things away from your body in the present moment. And then you have to bend it back in on itself, back to the body, the mind, the present moment. So a bit of a wrestling match there, just like working with some kind of pliable object. Or what comes to mind is if you've ever caught a python, which is what people do all the time. If you ever caught a python, you're constantly wrestling with it. It's going one way and you want to bring it, usually you have a sack and you want to put your python in a sack because then it goes quiet and you can hold the sack and it won't cause you any trouble. But the last thing the python wants to do is go into the sack. The python wants to get away, so its head is sticking out and it's sort of trying to wriggle away, and it's very strong, so you literally have to wrestle it back into the sack. And our mind is like that. You're kind of bending it and wrestling with it, pulling it back to look at itself, to look at this body, this mind, or what we call the five khandhas, the five aggregates. And there's a lot of resistance, partly because the five aggregates, just by just the name itself, is not very enticing, not very interesting. Five aggregates. Your mind wants to go and get to know the world. It's always looking for the next object of stimulation, the next thing to think about. And then backed by emotion, we have all the passions and emotions, the loves, the hates, the likes, the dislikes of life. That's what fires the mind up and sends it shooting out into the world. Whereas the Dhamma is kind of cool, ordinary, subtle, easy to miss. And sometimes we think boring. So just as when you receive the instruction in meditation to watch your breath, it's really not very exciting. But that's just in the beginning. You have to get over that hurdle, that perception of the Dhamma as being, say, unattractive, boring, unstimulating. And turn the mind's attention back to the five aggregates, this body, this mind. So I guess you have to rely a bit on trust in what the Buddha taught, trust in the wisdom and compassion of the Buddha, that he was encouraging us to do something that's useful for us. He was trying to get us to see where the root cause of our stress and suffering is as a human being, which is attachment or clinging. So these five khandhas, we call them Pancha Upadana khandhas, the basis, five khandhas which are a basis of clinging, or what we cling to. As we just chanted, Parahawe Panchakanda, when you cling to the khandhas, they become heavy. You hold on to or attach to anything, it starts to become heavy. Even a small thing can become heavy over time because you carry a small lightweight bag or a light book or cup or something very light. For a short period of time you don't feel the heaviness, but over time even something very small, lightweight can weigh you down because your arm gets tired. You can't carry things forever and feel comfortable. It's the same with these five khandhas. They become a burden. Who's carrying the burden? Well, the person, the pugala, the person. Us. We carry the burden. But the trouble is we don't see it because our mind is always going out to the world to try and escape this burden, following desires and delusions and confused thinking. We miss the simple truth that the khandhas are a burden in their nature. So the Buddha was encouraging us to look back at this experience of clinging or attaching to the khandhas, to get to know the truth, to incline our mind to actually realize the truth rather than living in the fantasy world, the make-believe world of sense desire and sensuality and always looking outwardly to the world. He said, well, just pay attention, look back at yourself and you realize, this clinging to this body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, sense consciousness is actually a weight. It's a heavy weight, it's a burden. But that's something you've got to know for yourself through your own investigation, your own awareness. And to know something like that, you have to train, you have to practice. You have to be able to sustain attention, so examine what's going on. The process of clinging or attachment can only be revealed when you look closely over a period of time, say. Because of this habit of always going out to the world, distracting the mind, we miss it. So in meditation you're developing this ability to look back at the truth, or incline the mind to see the truth, but also you're developing the strength of mind to do that well. So the Buddha would talk about the five strengths, balas, sattha, Just like faith, confidence, virya, energy, persistent effort. Sati, mindfulness, samadhi, states of calm, stillness, and then panya, insight. These are the strengths of mind that you're cultivating in your practice to look back at these 5 aggregates and understand them for what they are. A heavy burden that really we should put down, let go of. But in order to let go, you have to see the burdensome nature, or you could even say the painful nature. They're also dukkha. Because most of the time we're missing it through distraction, or sometimes we're just missing it willfully, willful non-admission or non-recognition of the way things are. We don't like to admit that what we're clinging to is actually hurting us. Partly we're so used to it. Like Ajahn Chah used to talk about, the guy who carries the heavy stone, he's just so used to it. When someone else points out that he's suffering carrying the heavy rock and he should put it down, he says, I can't. He said, why not? Because I'd have nothing to hold on to. I'd have nothing left to carry if I put it down. And that's like clinging attachment to the khandhas, which we give the name self, person, being, self. And nobody wants to let go of self because they're so used to looking after it, cherishing it, identifying with it. If you let go of self, then you'd have nothing left. So why put it down? That way of thinking, that perspective takes priority over seeing the pain of clinging and the suffering and wanting to be free from suffering. Because if we really wanted to be free from suffering, we'd let go of our attachment to the khandhas immediately. You put the heavy burden down straight away. Why carry it if it's just suffering? So as we meditate, we're developing this awareness and the ability to look and examine and investigate the truth. To see that it is in our own best interest to let go or put the burden down. Next question that comes up is always, well, who is it who puts down the burden? If the sense of self is the burden and you put it down, well, what's left? Well, another way of looking at it is, well, just do it first and then worry about that question. Otherwise you never do it. You're worrying, oh, if I let go of the self, I have nothing left. And who is it who lets go of this self? Well, you're just running around in circles and you never do it. You never taste the freedom or the liberation of putting down the burden. One who's put down the burden doesn't worry anymore about that kind of thing. They put down the burden of the past, the future, the sense of self. They're free. But when we go back just to the normal thinking mind, trying to sort it all out, rationalize it, logically understand it all, it doesn't make sense to put down the burden of self. It means you've got nothing left. So it doesn't sound very attractive, and that's why we don't want to do it. So you notice when your mindfulness improves as you practice meditation, and you're a little bit more aware and insight is deeper, one of the qualities you experience with this is the lightness of body and mind. And it comes as you become more mindful, then naturally you detach a little bit more from your usual habitual identification with thoughts, feelings, the body. So the mind feels happier, lighter. And the body reflects that as well. You experience piti and sukha in the body and the mind. is this lightness that comes. The more mindfulness you can establish, and the more you can look back and see the burdensome nature of khandhas and start letting go, and then the mind lightens up a bit. Brightens up as well, but lightens as in feels lighter. And it also, as it feels lighter, it's more, that releases energy and the ability to look at things with clarity. So one gains lightness and clarity. And they say the mind is in its best state to understand new things or look at things from a new perspective. It's less rigid, it becomes more flexible and able to, you can direct it to look at things in this more detached, objective way, so then it can accept the truth. When it accepts the truth, it's willing to put down what it can see as a burden or painful. That grasping and identifying with craving, attachment to views and opinions, ideas of who we are, who we want to be, the past, the future, all of these things which make up what we call the sense of self. When your mind becomes lighter, workable, you say pliable, flexible, then you can look at things correctly. That's looking at things as Dhamma rather than just from the normal kind of bias of the mind. And if you can see something as a burden, then you will put it down. And more importantly, not take it up again. It's a way of looking at somebody who really has understood the world. They don't take up the burden, they understand that the burden is to be put down and they don't want to take it up again. Much of the time we might have a small insight into that, the burdensome nature of attaching to every thought, every feeling, every emotion, attaching to the body. We have some clarity. We let go of a bit by seeing things as impermanent, suffering, not self. But then what do? We ruin it all. We go and pick everything up again and start again. So we're not ready to fully put down the burden because the insight is not yet established, you might say. The clarity, the insight. So we go and pick it up again. We get angry again, worried again, afraid again, desiring of things again, thinking that happiness will come from all of that. But if you keep practicing, then maybe you keep putting down the burden, and you can keep picking it up again, but then you start to see with clarity that this is suffering, isn't it? If I keep coming back to attach to every aspect of what I call self. So, number one, the body, identifying with the body and how it feels, how it looks, what you want from this body, good health, pleasure, etc. That attachment is burdensome, and if you keep seeing that, little by little you start to accept the body is not self. Can't bring you lasting happiness. It's impermanent. Ultimately, it's uncontrollable. The mind starts to accept that. So it's not picking up the burden so much. With the body, it's sometimes it's your own insight from constantly reflecting on how when you identify strongly with the body as self, as me, mine, myself, you're immediately setting up causes for suffering when you see that. Sometimes things happen that help you to see the burden of the body and help you to sort of open up a bit and accept ultimately it's not self. There was someone recently, they came to the monastery and they were talking about how when they caught COVID, had all these fears and Obviously there's the symptoms of COVID, the fever, the sore throat, the runny nose, the different symptoms they had. And then there was the fear, because there'd been so much hype and so much written and talked about COVID. As soon as they had the diagnosis, this is COVID, then they got worried, panicky. But then they recovered, because most people recover from it. It's basically like heavy flu for most people. So they've been through that, and then they got diagnosed with cancer. And the whole thing back again. But this time, they've been through COVID. They say, "Oh, COVID, I thought I was going to die. It's the end of the world." Then I recovered. Now they can apply that to cancer. Maybe even more of a threat, brings up more fear than COVID for some people. But it's also something you can treat, something that's not guaranteed. It's not necessarily terminal. But because they're somebody who listens to Dhamma and meditate, they applied what they learned from COVID to the new diagnosis of cancer. They said, well, body is not self, you know that. The symptoms, any discomfort and pain is impermanent. This is time to let go. Take the treatment, whatever, but let go. And they'd learned that through COVID, so now with cancer they can do that. Sometimes life is hard, but these lessons are helping us to put down the burden of attachment, because you learn through experience. It can be the same with mental pain, mental suffering of different disappointments that happen in your life, mistakes made, things not turning out how you like or wanted. The first time it's difficult, maybe it's overwhelming emotionally, but then if you've learned through some emotional crisis or big problem that came up, if you face something again, you can build on your previous understanding. You've been through despair, or grief, or anger, worry, frustration before, and you can see on reflection, it's impermanent and it's not really self because it arose and it passed away. So you're facing it a new time, you can use that same insight to help you put down the burden. So as you practice Dhamma, your ability, you might say your coping mechanism, your ability to deal with difficulties, suffering, whether it's just on the level of emotions and thoughts, or physical pain and suffering of the body, or just problems with other people and the world around you. All of that can be turned into insight that helps your mind to recognize that, if you grasp and attach to all of this, you're going to suffer. It's a burden. Better to let go, put it down. If you keep practicing, certainly if you meditate every day, partly what you're doing is just practicing this as a skill, putting down the burden that otherwise you would probably just keep picking up every day, and making that weight heavier and heavier. You attach and identify more strongly with your own feelings and emotions and the body. The weight starts to press down on you, so life can become a great source of despair if we're not careful. But if you do the opposite, you practice Dhamma every day, on every level. You practice generosity is also letting go of the burden. Sila is letting go of some of your more unskillful tendencies to harm yourself, harm others. And then meditation, mindfulness, particularly mindfulness and developing insight into the impermanent nature of the khandhas, then it's like you're letting go of the burden every day, little by little. And you get better at it. You can cope better with whatever suffering comes up, and you've got a way to let go. Not create more and more suffering or weigh yourself down with the burdens of life, but actually cast them aside. And it's quite possible to, as you live in the world longer, to be happier as a human being, to be happier and freer from the burdens of life if you apply the Dhamma and train yourself to look at the Dhamma and understand the Dhamma. But that's up to us, isn't it? That's up to us to make that choice and practice or not practice. We have plenty of good examples from the Buddha, the time of the Buddha right down to this present day and age. Plenty of good examples. Monks, nuns, men, women who have practiced and seen the value of putting that down the burden rather than endlessly accumulating more burdens. And some of them managed to completely remove the burden of attachment to the sense of self and live free. Say the enlightened ones walk the world free. It's like being completely free from debt. If you have one of those 30-year mortgages and you finally pay it off, it's done, the job is done. So it's possible, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves that it can be done. If other people can do it, I can do it. But we have to do that practice for ourselves. So I'll leave you with those reflections tonight.